That. Okay. So what I was going to say about record is if you don't want to be on record, turn your cameras off. So we are recording now. So just to say a little bit about Carver for those of you who don't know us, we are very much here to support and strengthen voluntary and community organisations, and our main support services are around funding and volunteering. So we have a volunteering coordinator in each of our offices, so that's North Warwickshire, Nuneaton, Rugby, Leamington and Stratford in Warwickshire. And we're really pleased to say we're having a volunteering coordinator for Solihull, who's on this webinar, Richard Lodder, starting on the 30th of November. So the main role of the volunteering coordinator is two parts really. One, to run the volunteer brokerage system. So we have a portal called Volunteer Connect, which links up people interested in volunteering with volunteer opportunities. And the second part is very much supporting volunteer managers, coordinators, supervisors around policies, recruitment. The most asked about support is generally around recruitment. And on our website, we have a host of really good resources which have all recently been updated. And Helen Wilkinson, who's our volunteering coordinator in Warwick District, she's put together for this webinar lots of resources around engaging safely with volunteers. So if we'll share that at the end, and Helen will just talk through those. So that's Carver. In terms of the event, we actually thought about this event pre-second lockdown. So it was very much about thinking about those volunteer roles that were active, and organisations were beginning to think about how to bring back volunteers safely. And we also thought it was a big issue for organisations. How do you recruit volunteers when you can't do it face to face? However, second lockdown has come, so the people speaking will be talking in a different scenario. Whilst some of the volunteers started coming back, they may not now be back. But I thought it would still be really useful for people just to hear about how organisations have brought back their volunteers and are planning to in a safe way, and how they're doing recruiting now they can't kind of do it face to face. So it's very much supposed to be a peer support event where organisations are sharing their top tips, and then you have a chance to ask questions or share your own experiences as well. So having said all of that, I'm going to pass you to our first speaker, and I'll just check that I don't need to admit anybody. No, I think everybody is in. So our first speaker is Hannah Nolan. So she is Volunteer Development Officer from Marie Curie Hospice. So we've got two hospices here today, but she is very much going to talk about volunteers who are hospice based, also volunteers that are fundraising volunteers, and that are community based volunteers. So Hannah, over to you.
Hi everybody, can everybody hear me all right? Yeah, okay, lots of nods ahead, so I presume that's a good thing. Yeah, so like Jane said, so I'm the Volunteer Development Officer for Marie Curie for this region. So I kind of work with volunteers and volunteer managers that are hospice-based, community-based, fundraising and retail, so a bit of everything really. So mainly looking kind of at the hospice-based volunteers. That's where probably the biggest amount of change and things have had to happen over the past 8 months. Right at the start of lockdown, we had to completely stop all volunteering, which in the hospice we have just over 200 volunteers doing a range of different things. So that was a huge amount of volunteers that we had to just stop straight away. But then obviously as things have kind of gone on, we have been able to kind of reintroduce a few of the roles. So any roles that were kind of continuing or were starting back up again were kind of thoroughly risk assessed, and we did those on a case by case basis. So for example, some of our volunteering roles, we've got within the hospice range from, we have volunteers that go onto the ward and take around food and drink to the patients. Then we've got volunteers that help out on reception, through to like volunteers that, you know, do all of our gardening and everything. So they were all kind of risk assessed on a case by case basis, because they all involved a different amount of contact with patients and a different amount of contact with the actual physical building of the hospice. So and that was all, we kind of followed that through the government guidelines on shielding and people that were in risk categories and everything like that. So we had to do full risk assessments before we allowed any volunteers back in. It was quite evident from the start, really, when we had certain staff that were having to shield and certain staff that were in risk categories, so they had to start working from home, that we needed to kind of use volunteers to be able to kind of support the staff, really, where kind of staff shortages were. So things like reception, we've pretty much had volunteers on reception throughout the whole of COVID. Because that was a big area that really needed some support. We kind of, as you can imagine, in a hospice, the infection control measures are like already really, really high. But through COVID, we've had to increase that. You know, we have to get our temperatures checked and everything. So another thing that we kind of did with how we kind of continued with volunteering is to see if we could adapt any of the roles. For example, our community-based befriending service, which is called the Helper Service, which is a vital kind of support for many people who are end of life and who are living with a terminal illness. These volunteers go into their home once a week for roughly about 3 hours. Sometimes it's a little bit more, sometimes it's a little bit less, and, you know, provide that vital kind of befriending support, which unfortunately had to kind of stop with lockdown with COVID. So that then changed to a complete telephone service or virtual service. So all of our volunteers were continuing to phone their clients and every week to check in on them. If they needed shopping and things like that, it was taken to the door, prescriptions picked up, things like that. Also any kind of virtual, so some of our volunteers were taking their patients on virtual walks around the park and doing kind of virtual cooking sessions and anything really to kind of keep people really kind of engaged without obviously having to do those face-to-face visits. Also, a lot of our hospice-based services, so things like we run, we've got a huge bereavement counselling service here at the hospice that for both adults and children. So that was something that usually people would come into the hospice for face-to-face, one-to-one support, which again had to kind of be adapted. So that went to telephone support again and virtual. And then for anybody that they deemed was at risk, so who really need it, we have been able to now set up some infection control measures so that those people can come into the hospice and receive their face-to-face support, as well as some of our group sessions. So we run sessions for MND, we run sessions for, we've got a men's shed, which, you know, unfortunately we literally just had an actual physical shed finished being built and then COVID hit, so it's not actually been used yet. So those kind of groups have gone online, and we use Microsoft Teams for that. Because it's one of our organisation use it a lot, and also for confidentiality it's quite good, it's quite secure. So when talking with patients and families and things like that, we can keep information quite secure. And then obviously with some cases we have had to pause volunteering. Certain hospice-based roles, especially those that are really patient-facing, have been paused and probably will be paused for some time until we deem it safe enough to bring those people back into a face-to-face environment with patients. So things like our complementary therapy, which has been set up as like online consultations as well. but unfortunately it's not been done face to face yet. We kind of like with engaging with the volunteers that were kind of on pause and you know, at home, not really kind of getting involved with what they would normally do. We really tried to kind of keep regular updates for them. So whether that's via email or telephone or newsletters or team catch-ups, you know, Microsoft Team catch-ups, we've really tried to kind of keep everybody, you know, up to date on what's going on, not just with their role, but with the organisation. And we've kind of been looking at ways that we can kind of keep them involved as well. So we had some lovely projects, especially through the first lockdown, that some of our volunteers that were shielding and things like that could get involved with. So such as we started a project called, it's around Feely Hearts. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of these. It's something that I think the NHS had, but they're basically like little material hearts, really small, that you can kind of keep in the palm of your hand. But we set it up so that because at the start we couldn't have visitors, so patients couldn't have their loved ones with them, we set it up so that the patient could have one heart and then the family could have another heart, so that it was some sort of physical connection that they had. And all our volunteers were able to make all of those, so we were like inundated with hundreds and hundreds of you know, material and knitted hearts, and which was amazing. And it gave those volunteers that were at home and couldn't necessarily come in and do their normal, it gave them an opportunity to still feel like they were connected with what was going on. Also, we've had loads of them making scrubs for us, masks, and doing lots of fundraising activities, which has been amazing. We've also been trying to promote other community events and activities that they could get involved with. So, you know, anything that any other organisation were promoting, or, you know, any online things that they could get involved with, just to kind of keep them motivated as well, not necessarily just for Marie Curie, but for their own kind of physical and mental well-being as well. Really tried to kind of keep an eye on that and try and support as and where needed. And then in terms of recruitment, we've still been taking inquiries over the phone and via email, which we do get quite a few, either just come through straight to me or to our operations centre. So we have been taking like inquiries still. Some of our opportunities have still been recruiting, so we've been heavily recruiting for our befriending service, because that's gone online, and that's gone to telephone support, so we can now expand that to pretty much anybody within the region, and even further afield now. Also our bereavement service, we've been heavily recruiting for that, because again, telephone support we can reach so many more people now. We haven't obviously had our walk-ins, which we used to get, especially for the hospice. We would get a lot of walk-ins who people would come in to say that they were interested in volunteering. So we haven't had that, unfortunately. And obviously we haven't been able to do any face-to-face recruitment interviews or anything. So we have been doing those over the phone and via Microsoft Teams. Any opportunities that we have had, we have been promoting them to our current volunteers. So you know, we've still got a massive amount of volunteers that aren't back into normal roles, so in the meantime we were seeing if they wanted to pick up any different roles. So we had a lot of patient drivers who obviously are not at the moment driving for patients, but they've now become they're delivering swabs and stuff for us from the hospice to the hospital. So we've kind of changed roles and got volunteers into different roles. Also, it's always good because you never know if they've got a friend or family member that wants to pick something up. They always, you know, they're our best promoters, really. So we promote it to them and then they pass it on. And we have been using our website and social media to do any kind of recruitment campaigns. We've got a website that we can promote those on. So yeah, so kind of just where we can, kind of, you know, like I said, using those new roles, which tend to be the virtual, the online or the telephone support. trying to kind of promote them as much as possible, really. So yeah, that's my whistle stop tour.
Hannah, thank you so much. That was so comprehensive. I mean, that's a huge undertaking. Did you say 200 volunteers?
So we've just, in the hospice, we've got just over 200. Yeah, I mean, in the, you know, we've got a much bigger amount for like fundraising and retail, and our helper service is roughly about 80 volunteers. So yeah, it's quite a lot.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, and you know, that understanding of what volunteers are doing, but also what you're doing to engage those volunteers on pause. That's great to understand. Any questions for anybody for Hannah?
Yeah, could I ask about the Feely Hearts?
Yeah.
What is that idea then again, or?
So it came about because we had a lot of patients. Obviously, we had to completely stop visiting at the start of lockdown. So it was quite distressing for families and for the patients to not have that connection with their families whilst, you know, going through probably the worst time in their lives. So we wanted to try and do something that they felt that they could still be connected. So one of the ways that we did it was to produce two kind of identical hearts, whether that be knitted or sewn or crocheted or however you wanted to do it. And the patient would keep one and then the family would keep the other. And then it was kind of felt like it was like a way that they could feel connected. Or the other way that we did it was a patient had a heart whilst they were here, through their time here, and then when they died, the heart then went to the family afterwards.
Oh, that's really lovely. Because I'm part of the Friendship Project for Children, and so yeah, we recruit befrienders for the children, and they haven't been able to see the children. It's been a similar scenario, and we've done similar to what you've done, and it's gone virtual. Although they are able to see them now and go for walks and things, but it's just ways of keeping that connection going.
Yeah.
So that was a lovely idea.
Yeah, and we used it a lot with our with the children that, you know, of family members and stuff that were here, and they found it really, really comforting to have something like that they could kind of put in their rooms, or, you know, go to sleep with, even things like that, just so that they'd got a little something of that person.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. Any other questions? I noticed Helen put something on the chat about independent volunteering. Helen, do you just want to mention that resource?
Yes, so during lockdown 1, we were in a situation where we were getting inundated with people wanting to volunteer, and actually, you know, because of groups suspending their services, we were sort of struggling to place everybody. So in desperation, we pulled together a list of ideas for people to do independent volunteering. We've taken that down at the moment, but I think we'll need to sort of reinstate that. But some of the ideas might not be sort of relevant anymore. So if anybody has any other ideas, like the Feely Heart idea, where people can, you know, do some stuff from home and link in with, you know, other groups, then we'd really like to hear about them. I'm sure there's lots of things that people can do like that. So yeah, just let us know if anybody else has some, you know, has some good ideas, really.
Thank you, Helen. Thank you very much, Hannah. So we're moving over to the second organisation. So this is Solihull Hub, based in North Warwickshire, and there's 2 people, so I don't quite know how you're wanting to do the double act, but we've got Charlie Painter, who is the volunteering coordinator, and then we've got Helen Whitaker, who's has a community engagement role. So it is a community hub that has lots of activities, particularly around social isolation. So Charlie, should we come to you first? Is that okay?
Yeah, sure. So the hub has, at the very beginning, Obviously we had to close our doors, unfortunately, and everything had to stop, and our volunteers, a lot of them in vulnerable situations themselves, a lot of them retired, so elderly, some of them had health complications. So it was difficult at the beginning to kind of understand how we were going to go forward. I was working from home, and so it was at that point, to keep our volunteers engaged, the main thing we were doing was keeping them informed, again, keeping in touch with them, checking in on them, because again, a lot of our volunteers also were suffering social isolation, hence why they came to volunteer for us, to have that sense of community and being part of something. So we had a number of vulnerable people that would either volunteer for us, who would come in daily to the hub. So I was ringing them all the time, checking in on them, and then that kind of snowballed into, do you need anything from the shop, and all that type of thing. So kind of, you know, I had to really diversify my role to a certain extent. And then when we could come back to the hub, Helen did a fantastic job at putting together a risk assessment for us. So she did a risk assessment for the town hall and for the COSA hub, and we assessed that we could safely open with either me or Helen in and a volunteer in, and it meant that we could have one or two individuals that could come in and see our volunteers, because we're quite a small space, relatively speaking, with regards to the hub. So, you know, we were quite limited in that regard. But we had volunteers that, regardless of the fact that they were over 75 and they were fed up of being told that they had to stay at home and all this type of stuff, when it got to the point where they felt comfortable to come out, they were raring to go, and they were so excited to come back to the hub. And it was wonderful to see. You know, we had a volunteer in each day, and we started to steadily see more and more people coming in, and you could see the volunteers, just their whole demeanour changing, that finally we were getting somewhere, and it was great. Unfortunately, we're back to square one a little bit at the moment, but again, we're just constantly keeping in touch with our volunteers, and checking in and making sure they're okay. We are still getting a lot of inquiries, and we are still getting people that need help. So some of our volunteers that have the capacity, they are doing a few things at home if they can, checking in on vulnerable people, checking in on people that they've built relationships with over the years. You know, we've got some volunteers that have been with us 5-6 years. So they're still keeping in touch with the people that they've built relationships with, and similarly with myself. And so we're finding our way through this second lockdown, because we've learned so much from the first, that in actual fact, thankfully, fingers crossed, it is only 4 weeks, and we've got, you know, not long left, because like I said, we've got some volunteers that are chomping at the bit to get back, and I've got people ringing me wanting to see them. So, you know, I'm arranging appointments to hopefully be able to get us back into the swing of things, for even if it's just for a short while, and they do it to us again, fair enough. But if we can get our volunteers back, so they feel useful, like, I think that's the ultimate thing that comes out of all of this, isn't it? People volunteer to feel useful and to feel that they're part of something. And especially when it comes to a community hub, we do have a lot of individuals that are retired or nearing retirement, and they don't want to just be sat at home. They want to feel like they're engaging with people, and you know, and if we've got a few of our regulars where we've had some big birthdays, so some of the volunteers that have built relationships with those people, you know, giving them a photo, like a happy birthday phone call, and just checking in and all that type of stuff. But we're getting there. It's difficult when we've got a relatively small space to kind of get people back in, but we've managed to get most of our volunteers back in. Like I said, we do have some that are that much more vulnerable, so we're just checking in on them and making sure they're okay. In terms of recruitment, again, it's quite difficult, but we're looking at ways to diversify and ways that we could, again, like it was spoken about before, maybe we could engage with other projects that are going on, and we can encourage volunteering into those, because hopefully when this is done and we can try and get things back up and running a little bit more, we have like sewing groups and knitting groups and all different types of community art groups and walking groups. You know, maybe we could look to help kind of build some volunteering aspects with that as well, to try and get people out and in the community if they're feeling a bit isolated, which is the main thing really. But yeah, that's where we are at the moment. I don't know if Helen's got anything to add.
Thank you, Charlie. That's brilliant. I don't think I've got well done. I don't think I've got an awful lot to add. I think the biggest thing is just thinking out the box that Charlie and I have had to do. And one of the things that we've even resorted to is, I mean, luckily for us, we're on ground floor, so we even see people through the window and out the window. We get people sort of collecting outside windows so that they can just see us and talk to us for a few minutes. So it's just having to do things a bit differently. Can I just quickly say, in relation to the last comments, that when we first went into lockdown, I was one of the people, I think I just showed you that, who did some of the making hearts, and you make 2 identical hearts and put them in seal bags, and then one can go to the family and one can go to the person who's either in hospital or in the hospice. And that was something that I know a lot of people did, and I know a couple of the volunteers did it at home because it still made them feel useful and that they had a purpose. But I can't really add to anything Charlie said. She's covered the bases. We were really chuffed to get one volunteer back in and have some people coming back, and we are looking after our network of people by phone, by through the window, or bumping into them in the community, and just making sure we maintain our presence and keep the community hub on the radar. So thank you for the time.
Thank you very much, Charlie and Helen. Thanks for sharing those the hearts, Helen, and thanks also for just kind of repeating that theme about organisations just being so adaptable, and also really taking great care of the volunteers who can't volunteer at the moment. I think, Charlie, that issue coming through for a lot of organisations, that a lot of volunteers have been in the vulnerable category, and that has made things really challenging, and volunteers in that category just becoming so frustrated at not being able to volunteer. There's a message I noticed in the chat which says, Charlie, Kingsbury Water Park is close by to you. We're not actively recruiting at the moment, but if any of your volunteers are looking for outdoor activities, then at some stage we'd love to accommodate.
Oh, that sounds amazing. Yeah, great, thank you.
So that's good. So any questions from the group for Charlie or Helen, or any just comments arising from what they've been talking about?
Just Charlie, it's Tina, sorry, I'm the volunteering coordinator for the Knitting and Bedworth area. I'd just be interested to know that before the lockdown you mentioned that you'd opened the community group with one volunteer in there. What kind of services were you offering before the lockdown?
Oh, before COVID, as it were. Yeah, before COVID, you'd walk into the hub and it'd be absolutely full of people. So we would, so we'd have in the town hall or the hub, you'd have your drop-in points for the CAB and Mind, lots of different organisations, veterans touch point and all those type of things. So it'd be like a constant flow of people every single day. You'd have your regulars. So sometimes, you know, we'd have 2 or 3 people that would come into the hub every single day and sit up base with one of the laptops. And it's because they were obviously quite lonely and they needed that connection. So before all this happened, the hub was raring to go, and it was so exciting to see it so full all the time with so many people. And it was, me and Helen could never get anything done because we were constantly, you know, chatting to people and connecting with all different individuals in the community. And it was just, it was absolutely brilliant, and I would absolutely love to get back there again, and I'm determined to get back there again. So I'm just hopeful that we can get through all of this, because before all this we had a massive launch in January and it was incredible. It was so big that we had to have it in the main Coastal Town Hall, because the community, the actual community space in the hub couldn't accommodate that many people. And it was just lots and lots of people coming to meet us and to talk about what we were going to be doing going forward. And it was all about engaging with the wider community, engaging with the high street as well, and touching base with all the different industries and shops and cafes and all sorts, all within Coleshill, so we could all come together. And it was, we've got the tagline that the Coleshill Hub is the heart of the community. Yeah. And that's exactly what it was, and that's what was happening and still can happen. But we've just got to ride this wave, and then we'll get through it, won't we? So yeah, it was brilliant.
Yeah, thank you.
Charlie, there's a question on the chat.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that you'll be recruiting different types of volunteers following this period?
To be honest, I think we would welcome anybody still. I don't see why we would change our stance necessarily. The hub is the heart of the community, as it were, and it's there for everybody. If you're over 75 and you feel comfortable and you'd like to come and volunteer at the hub, come and volunteer at the hub. But we've also got a 21-year-old guy that volunteers for us on a Monday. You know, there's a huge spectrum of people, and we're open to anybody that wants to take part, really, and be part of the Coleshill Hub. But yeah.
Can I just add to that?
Mm-hmm.
Is that okay?
Yes, Helen. Yes, you're fine. You go ahead.
I think one of the concerns that Charlie and I have talked about as well is the number of people who have lost their jobs or been furloughed and are feeling very vulnerable because of their job security and because of the economic situation. And one of the things that one of the services we do offer at the hub is to help people with updating their CVs, applying for jobs online, helping them build their confidence, finding jobs online, you know, actually going through that process. And some of the more mature people, dare I say, of my age, in their 50s, who perhaps are feeling very vulnerable about losing their jobs and the work situation. We're very good at saying, well, come in and see us and we'll have a look and help you do your CV and show you how you can do some of this stuff online. And what we tend to find at the hub, the history of the hub has been, you know, it's been here for 8 years, is that if anybody's made unemployed or lost their job for whatever reason, if they come and volunteer, and a lot of you guys will know this, if you come and volunteer, it sort of rebuilds their confidence, rebuilds their self-worth, makes them actually think, by coming and doing something voluntary, they suddenly realise, oh, I didn't know I could do that, and oh, I really like this, and I can learn more about this. And what we've found, and we have actually a very good history of it, if we ever sort out the data on it, is that the number of people who've come in feeling really quite rejected by life and by employers and the industry, and they've built up the skills and they've built up their confidence again, and then they found a job, and then we give them a hard time because we go, well, you're not going to volunteer anymore because you've got a job. But it's really wonderful because they have. And we still have people who come back to us when they're on holiday, or there's a guy who lost his job, worked for the airport, was furloughed, came in to see us, and now works part-time, so he still comes in. And it's that balance, once you've built up those relationships, and he knows what he got from volunteering that got him back to the work at the airport. So it's that balance. It's really interesting of the sort of connections and the relationships that you weave. And now he works, he's happy, but he still has a capacity to give that support to us because he got something from it. So there's a lot of good stories, and there's a lot of good lessons that we get from it, and we learn as much as they do. I just wanted to say that.
Thank you, Helen. That was great. And Helen above on my screen, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I just wanted to, I suppose, avoid any confusion. I wasn't suggesting that people would think about, recruiting different types of volunteers in terms of demographics or age or anything like that, because obviously that potentially could be discriminatory. It was more about different types of roles. Whether you see that, people have lost funding over the COVID sort of period, whether you'd be wanting to recruit people to sort of help with, fundraising activities or support with, digital stuff, because obviously we're all having to get to grips with changes or new technology and adapting to that. Just really kind of wanting to sort of open up that debate really to see whether anybody's thought about whether they need to develop new volunteering roles, or if that's just something that hasn't hit the radar or hasn't featured.
Anybody want to come in on Helen's comments?
Yeah, I will. So one, because as I said earlier, we have this befriending service, which is very much a face-to-face thing, like a lot of you, and that's where the benefits come in face-to-face. And we've also had to go virtual with phone calls and letters and things over lockdown. But it has meant that we've actually seen the benefits of this communication, and it has made us discuss whether a different type of older friend, someone who can't get out, someone who hasn't got a car, could actually become a virtual friend in the friendship project and become more like a pen pal friend, which isn't a role we've had before, and it's something that we're looking at and giving it a bit of a try, just to reach more volunteers, because there are people out there who can't get out themselves, so they wouldn't be able to do face-to-face. But this way they could do some sort of virtual face-to-face or letter writing, and it's kind of given them letter writing skills which they thought they'd lost, and the children who aren't used to writing letters or receiving anything through the post these days have sort of experienced something new. So I would say that's one role we're thinking we're going to be potentially growing with that.
Thanks, Fiona. I noticed Helen from Coastal Hub, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I was going to say, I find it, in my experience, we find it sometimes quite difficult to have sort of structured volunteers roles, because people aren't coming in and doing a paid job. Personally, in my experience, I found it quite difficult to have this is the volunteer role that you are coming in, and this is what works for us as we're a community hub, and we do quite a variety of things. We do signposting, we sort of do support, mental health stuff, but we also do practical stuff. So if we had sort of structured roles, like we want someone who could do funding, or we want someone who could do specifically IT, then it would limit our options of actually getting volunteers in, because we would be being more specific to what we needed. What Charlie and I tend to do is we say, come on, we would like you to come and volunteer at the hub. And if people come in, we get to know them, and we get to know possibly a bit about their employment history and their hobbies and what they enjoy. And then you sort of say to them, I sort of say to them, come and be involved with us, and then come up with ideas. What do you think you can bring? Where can you see a gap in the services that we offer that you're interested in, that you feel you could help us take forward? So you might get someone who goes, well, I really love doing, something on the computer or whatever, and they then say, I could help develop this. So then they engage and they commit much more, because they've come up with the idea, it's something they're interested in, and it's something they're willing to drive forward. So for me, we're much more sort of volunteer led with the people we've got coming in, what they can offer, and therefore what we can take forward, which is really nice. And I think it keeps that commitment from the volunteer, because they feel a level of ownership in that particular sphere of activity that they're interested in. Hope that makes sense.
Thank you, Helen. Yeah, it's that kind of combination of set roles and evolving roles based on people's interests and passion, isn't it? That seems to to work well. Any other questions or observations?
Just more on the everyone's talking about the letter writing, which is a great idea, and Helen's kind of mentioned that this is something that Warwickshire Carver can promote as independent volunteering. So those kind of one-off type volunteering roles, or any projects that you've got available within your organisation, we can still promote that with our volunteers. So please just send anything through to us.
Thanks, Tina. So thank you very much, Charlie and Helen. There's some nice positive comments about what you've been saying on the chat, so have a look at them. And Hannah, some positive comments as well. So if there's no more questions at this stage, we'll go on to the next organisation, which is Warwickshire Wildlife Trust. So they are the leading conservation trust working across Warwickshire, but also Solihull. We've got another double act. So we have got Amanda Evans, who is Development Director, and then Wendy Knott, who's Volunteering Coordinator. So again, this was, at the pre-second lockdown, when, volunteers were returning to working outside. So we were thinking about, we had that in mind when we organised the event. But Amanda and Wendy will give us an update as to where they are now. So I don't know who wants to start first.
I'll start first, and then I'll give a bit of an overview, and then I'm going to hand over to Wendy, because she's done all the hard work in getting the volunteers back, and all managing all the communications and the safe systems of work and things. So I guess from our perspective, we're quite lucky that the majority of our volunteering is outdoors, which in itself makes life a little bit easier. We are hugely reliant on our volunteers. I've been doing a bit of number crunching recently, and I think we had a total of about 35,000 hours, volunteer hours last year. So having to completely stop that in March was a huge thing, really. We have volunteers doing pretty much everything across our organisation. So we have volunteers outdoors doing conservation work, but we also have volunteers in our visitor centres helping us with admin, and also helping with our children's activities. So we have schools come in, and generally we have kind of one-to-one staff and volunteer ratio with that. So we have a volunteer leading a session alongside staff. So all of that had to stop in March. And I guess one of the things we were quite conscious of during that time was just keeping in touch with our volunteers, knowing that for those volunteers, and particularly for some volunteers, that's pretty much their lifeline. It's possibly one of the only times they go out during the week. So unfortunately we had to furlough Wendy, but we kept in touch with volunteers through our nature news, which we sent out every week, and had a great interaction from our volunteers, sending in photos and pictures, quiz answers, all sorts of things to keep them involved, and actually really helping us in terms of content for those new weekly newsletters. We also had a nature quiz each week, and for those volunteers where we knew they were potentially vulnerable, we did some regular phone calls to them just to keep in touch, make sure they were okay. I think one of them even involved somebody checking whether our bins had been collected, because theirs hadn't. But at the end of the day, if that was what they needed to keep in touch, then that's absolutely fine. So once the lockdown was eased a little bit, I guess for us the starting point was to look at organisationally what we needed, and we wrote our COVID policy, our risk assessment, and put safe systems of work in place, which originally were for staff returning, really. But I think as we wrote them, we had in mind that some of these things would be applicable to volunteers as well. So we were very keen to make sure we kept to the guidelines, and stuck to small group sizes, eliminated touch points and those kind of things. So I guess that's where we went with that, and I'll let Wendy explain more of the detail behind how we did that. We saw a massive increase in volunteer inquiries, and we've seen a massive increase in volunteers wanting to get involved since, to the point where we've had to turn people away because we've had to limit group sizes. And at the moment, because of the second lockdown, we've put all new volunteer recruitment on hold, probably till the new year, in all honesty. That said, we are carrying on our volunteer sessions at the moment. We haven't stopped them because we finally, the guidance came out that said that volunteering people could continue to go out to volunteer. And some of our work is very time limited to this time of year. So a lot of the work that we do in our woodlands has to be done this time of the year to avoid bird nesting season and those kind of things. But we were very clear with the volunteers that we had no expectation that they came back, and it was really their choice whether they chose to come back. We made sure that they were all aware of the guidance, the new guidance, which says if you're over 60, you're potentially more vulnerable and you should wash your hands more and those kind of things. And made sure that everybody was clear of that before they carried on. So I think at that point, I'm going to hand over to Wendy, who can tell you a bit more about the kind of the detail process we went through. And has, as I said, done all the hard work in getting our volunteers back out and about.
Morning all. So leading on from Amanda, obviously during the first lockdown I was furloughed, and then coming back into the role, we had to have a look at, you know, what was going to be best and what was going to work well for us. So it was going through all our risk assessments to make sure that each activity and task we were going to do we could carry out as safely as possible within the guidelines. We had to issue then obviously safe systems of work for each of our activity groups. Some of them are actually volunteer self-led groups as well. So it was a case of meeting with them and going through how it was best going to work for them and for the trust in meeting the tasks we need to carry out, as well as keeping within, you know, the safety, health and safety of the new guidelines. We then put out and put together an actual volunteer safe operating procedure, which was a policy and procedure which had to be emailed out to all our volunteers, which is over like 500 volunteers, and they had to read through and acknowledge their return if they were happy to return to volunteering. We weren't forcing anybody to, and it was okay that if they said no, we're going to sit out until we know we feel safe it's okay to do so. So once that happened and we started getting the groups back together, we had to have a look at what additional requirements we needed to put in place. That was additional PPE. It was a case of looking at what tasks were going to be carried out. So instead of where it's been done for many years and volunteers have come together, they've carried out a task but they've been sharing tools in between, that couldn't happen. So we had to make sure that we had the correct amount of tools to carry out the task. So each person had their own sort of like set of tools for that task, and that's the task they did. So there was no sharing of equipment. We've obviously got the additional PPE that's gone in, and we've got the actual now cleaning down of equipment as well, which has to be taken into the amount of time we spend on the tasks that we need to carry out. So all in all, it's been a bit of an eye-opener for us in the amount of work we've had to do to make this possible. I did have some wonderful feedback from a volunteer within the second lockdown, where he'd sent out additional guidance to them. They were all really chuffed that we could continue within this second lockdown. And I had one volunteer sent back to say, I'm glad to see that the government is now working towards your actual guidance that you've sent out to us. So I don't know, that just reflects that I know we've done a real good job. That's what it tells me. Everybody is very reassured in the way we've done things. We haven't just run headlong into it. We've taken our time. We went through a strategic process in making sure that these tasks could be carried out safely. And it was, yeah, I think it's a job well done for us on that. We've kept in contact with our volunteers with obviously regular updates. We've had to send out various new updated on risk assessments and bits of paperwork for them to actually be acknowledging and working towards. we have stopped with taking on new volunteers, although we've got an actual holding list and we send out holding emails to them for after this is sort of like over and we get back to some sort of normality. Where we've been able to accommodate new volunteers, we have offered places, but these have been really limited to them. We try to stick to our core of volunteers of what we know and concentrate on getting them going again safely. So until probably, yeah, next year, probably springtime next year, that's when we'll be looking to start recruiting. But all our processes at the moment are being done online for when it comes to recruitment, the form filling, the acknowledgement of various forms. So everything has changed. And those that haven't got email addresses of our volunteers, we've actually obviously had to send out via the post and bits. So we have kept in contact with our volunteers throughout with various updates. And now we're just looking at a way to say thank you to them for sticking with us through this difficult year and working and volunteering in these very different times. So we're hopefully going to be sending out, well, we're going to be sending out e-cards to them at Christmas. We're going to be sending out their thank you letters, but we're also working out how we can do it safely to where we'd normally have a buffet at Christmas where everybody would come together as a thank you event, and it would be like an evening event. We're probably going to be doing a delivery service to them. So when they're out doing an actual group session, we're going to do probably a run out with breakfast batches, drop off as like a delivery service, and then come away again. And it's just a little way of saying thank you to them.
Thank you so much, Wendy. I mean, a job well done, as you say, in terms of, you know, the huge logistical nightmare of trying to adapt to the guidelines. But also, thank you very much for reminding us about celebration, and thank you. It's just so important to continue doing that at this time. There's quite a few, well, there's some questions on the chat that I know, Amanda, you've responded to, but do you just want to just verbalise them in terms of, there was something about keeping activity? Have you limited the size of your activity?
So we have in that we have on each session there will be a group of 6. There may be more than one group of 6 on an activity, but they will be at separate parts of the reserve. So that's where we're really fortunate that we're outdoors, we've got big reserves, we can space people out. And the other thing is that within those bubbles of 6, they also work 2 metres apart. So, you know, those social distancing guidelines are adhered to, and within each of those bubbles of 6, there has to be a first aider. So if they are on, you know, 2 ends of the reserve, we know that the first aid aspect is covered. We're quite fortunate that we do train a lot of our volunteers in first aid, so that we have the capacity to split across the reserve, which is something we discovered a few years ago, really, was that, you know, in a normal situation our volunteers can be spread over a wide area, and we needed more than one first aider with those sessions. So yeah, so we've been keeping people into bubbles of 6, and where the activity has more than that, they're on 2 separate parts of the site. So
thank you, Amanda. Any other questions, observations from the group? Was that Sue?
Yes, please, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Obviously, we're in a very similar situation to Wendy and Amanda, but on a smaller scale. And when it was first locked down, we couldn't have any volunteers on site. And gradually now we have got some of our longer outstanding volunteers, because we've got the outside space to help with the gardening, etc. Because I think, as you say, there was a lot of people, and there are a lot who are sort of over the vulnerable age and everything, but really wanted to be able to do something, and we're really quite eager to get back, which we've been able to do for a limited amount. and obviously they can social distance, and they've got the tools, and they're cleaning their own tools and everything, so that's working quite well again now. And it has made a lot of difference to, I think, the mental health of some of the volunteers. Unfortunately, we had to close the cafe down, so a lot of our volunteers who helped in the cafe and things haven't been able to come back, and we have had to change the way we actually operate slightly, because obviously people are pre-booking when we could open to the public, and make sure that everything was in place, you know, all the rules and regulations were met. But I think it has made a lot of difference to those volunteers who could come back. We're not actively recruiting at the moment. We do have an expression of interest form online, and obviously we have now limited the amount of volunteers who can be on site at one time, but it all seems to be working quite well. Obviously a lot of the events and things couldn't take place, but we did things, you know, at half term through Halloween and things, and people have been booking, and that's working out quite well, and we're hoping to have the gardens open, you know, for a couple of weeks up to Christmas. There are some changes taking place on site at the moment, so we are actually closed for a couple of weeks at the moment. But it is difficult, and it is, you know, we have been contacting the volunteers and keeping in touch for those who haven't been able to come back, because it does make a big difference to a lot of people, as everyone said. You know, it just gives them that purpose in life to come out and do something.
So our education volunteers are probably one of the only ones that haven't come back, actually, because we're not, well, we are running some children's sessions, but we don't really want to be, then it's not in the same way that we're tending to do more outreach with schools rather than schools coming to us, so they haven't been involved in that. We have had our visitor centre volunteers back, because we'd put some very strict protocols in place for kind of within the visitor centre anyway. And what we did with them was invite each one to come in and have a walk through the system with us, and you know, from that point to get their feedback as well. But also said to them, look, come in, see what we've got in place, see if you feel comfortable. If you don't feel comfortable, then don't come back. You know, we're not saying you can't come back ever. We'll keep you on the list. We'll keep in touch with you. But you know, there's definitely no obligation for anybody to come back if they don't feel happy to do so. But as Wendy said, I think most of the feedback from our volunteers is that they are very comfortable with the processes that we've got in place, and even those that, you know, some of them are volunteer led and some of them can be a little bit difficult at times, but even they have kind of stuck with the protocols, agreed with what we're doing, and have been really supportive, I think. Wendy?
Yeah, they have. I think it's been a difficult process throughout, no matter what sort of volunteering, you know, aspect you're in. It's you know, we've had to sort of look at it and adjust and think about the safe ways of getting volunteers back. But we've taken a step-by-step process, and we've taken each sort of area of volunteering, we've looked at it totally separately. So like Amanda said, with our VC volunteers, we invited them back, we had a walk through with them and asked them for any feedback where they feel we probably hadn't looked at an area. So we asked them to look at it from a public point of view and asked them to do a walk through the VC to make sure they thought it was safe for the members, our members and general public to visit. So they felt involved within that process of getting it all restarted again. It's the same as for our volunteer-led work parties. We met with them and we asked for their input on how they thought, you know, the task could be carried out safely and how they felt they were going to manage it, because they don't have a member of staff with them, but it is volunteer-led. So we need to be reassured that they were competent enough to do that. They were going to take on board what we were saying and understood the health and safety and the new guidelines and our new safe systems of work that needed to go into place, our new volunteer safe policy and procedure for operating while volunteering with us. So a lot of work has gone into it. but I think that's across the board for everybody. And yes, and it's looking at different ways of doing things, and I think this might open up a few ideas for us when it comes to different opportunities of volunteers, not just on the conservation side as well, which predominantly that's our main role, is practical conservation volunteers being out there. So it's just having a look and seeing what we can do for other volunteers. Through the lockdown, we try to keep people engaged in doing their own sort of like bird surveys and wildlife sightings. We're in their own gardens and with their own areas as well, and we encourage them through the first lockdown where possible to actually visit our reserves, to actually and enjoy them, and actually take their time to see what was around them, because I think through all this people have become more in touch with nature and the outside world around them. So, and I think that's where our increase of interest for volunteering has come from as well, which is good. It's been a nice positive for us.
Thank you, Amanda and Wendy. I think, you know, what you're saying just shows that even in an emergency pandemic situation, that importance of planning and process and still consulting with people. And also, people absolutely love your breakfast idea, comments on the chat. So thank you very much for that. We're going to pass over now to Anthony Dwyer from Mighton Hospice. We were very aware as an organisation that there were limited volunteering opportunities after the first lockdown, and when volunteers were, you know, we were getting more inquiries, and charity retail seemed to be the one area that was kind of thriving around volunteering until second lockdown. So over to Anthony.
Hello everybody. Can you see me okay?
Yeah.
Yes, we can see you.
Brilliant. Hi everybody, nice to be on the call. So I'm an area manager for Mighton Hospice, and I look after half of our shops, so that's 12 to 13 shops around Coventry and Warwickshire, and then we've got another area manager who covers the other side. It was actually really sad when we closed for the second lockdown, because the week before we'd seen the biggest number of volunteer hours since returning. So that was absolutely fantastic. And we have seen our sales at least 80% of where we were before lockdown. A lot of that is down to volunteer support, because we just couldn't do it without them. The key things for us really was communication with the volunteers in the last lockdown. So our volunteering department would contact our volunteers at least once a month, and our shop managers contact them weekly via phone call or WhatsApp group. So we've absolutely made sure during this lockdown, and we've had some learnings around communication, that is really, really key. So I'd say if it's the one thing you do, make sure you keep in touch with them. When they did come back, we ensured everyone was taken through a thorough risk assessment. So the manager would walk the volunteer through that risk assessment, talk them through it, and we also had it signed off. So if I ever went in on a shop visit, we would be checking that regularly to make sure that our volunteers fully understood what we had in place to protect them and the public. So I think it's really important to show the volunteers before they come back what safety measures are in place. They're almost making them feel comfortable. And like people have said before, asking any questions around the safety measures and how they might feel about it. Obviously, we have the maximum number of people that can shop in our shops and also work in our back areas. So that's just more for the manager to be aware of how many people they can have in their working space, so it is safe for everybody. One key thing was about having clear rotas. So some shops, say for example in Bedworth, have 150 hours of volunteers per week. And obviously that manager couldn't have all of those people in at once. So we made sure that managers have clear rotas throughout the week. And also that will help them with any new volunteer inquiries that they might have. So where they have gaps in their rotas, I think that's really important. because you want to be able to offer someone a position or a place, but you need to know where you've got those gaps. We have seen a massive increase in new volunteer inquiries, and a big thanks to Helen and to Tina for all your support with that as well. We've seen a lot of people who are on furlough or who have been made redundant wanting to come and volunteer with us. And what we said to our managers is it's really important, and I know Tina's emphasised this as well with some of my managers, is it's important to act on that referral. So we said actually within 48 hours, you should be getting onto that referral and asking them to pop in and see you and letting them have a go. And then it's just really important to catch that potential volunteer before they go on to something else. Oh yes, so we have re-established our e-commerce department within Mighton Hospice in our retail arm, and we have seen a massive amount of sales through that. Obviously a lot of people now are shopping online, so I think a lot of charities have adapted to that way of working, but we do need e-commerce volunteers, so that's listing products, researching products, taking photographs. So if people do know of any people out there that want to, please ask them to get in touch with Mighton. And I'm sure that'll be the same for Marie Curie and other charity shops out there. There is actually two real big success stories for me. And one of those in particular was a lady that was in the training and development department in a big manufacturer. And unfortunately she was made redundant, but she's actually got paid employment at Mighton Hospice, so she just wanted a little part-time job, and we had some vacancies within our retail team, and she's slotted in really nicely, but she had taken up just a day's volunteering a week in one of our shops, so it's worked out well for her and it's worked out well for us. And that's it really from me. Oh.
Thank you very much, Anthony. Any questions for Anthony or observations?
Doesn't look like it, Jane.
Yeah, I got from you, Anthony, that that importance of communication, just keeping people informed, making sure they're comfortable, and really appreciate the fact that you're picking up quick response to referral, because we find from doing the volunteer brokerage that can be an incredible frustrating thing for volunteers who are really enthusiastic, and then organisations take time to get back to them. So thanks very much for that. Any other observations? Helen?
Just to say, I think I put it in the chat, but just to say that up until lockdown 2, retail is from the sort of from lockdown 1 really, retail volunteering is one of the areas that we were being able to refer people to for the last kind of couple of months, and so it's just good to hear that you have actually been seeing an increase in volunteers coming through, because we've been
absolutely
pushing it to people. Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. So we've got about a quarter of an hour left, so just two kind of more things. Just going to go to our last speaker, and then we've got Helen to share resources. So I thought it'd be really, really nice to end on a volunteer perspective. Aline is just going to talk a little bit about her experience working in a charity shop, Cancer Research UK, Solihull. Aline is also one of our employees. So she's just going to say a little bit about what it feels like to be a volunteer returning safely. So Aline, over to you.
Morning everyone, thanks Jane. Yes, so I won't echo too much of what I'll try to anyway, what Anthony has said in terms of the management side, although some of the things I've seen as a volunteer very much reflect for the Cancer Research Shop what Anthony was describing. Before lockdown 1 started, one of the decisions we made as a bunch of volunteers was to find ways to stay in touch, and that was a bit of a challenge because we couldn't really shield. We had a lot of us who were shielding or were vulnerable, but we set up a WhatsApp group and that WhatsApp group has been really great to help people not feel so isolated, and it's continued after the first lockdown. It's still continuing during the second lockdown to keep that sense of being a small community. Again, other people have mentioned this morning. For some of us volunteers, going to the shop is the only time we go out, and that's been really evident in the amount of communications there has been on that group, where we've exchanged about volunteering from home during lockdown and since the shop has reopened, because not everyone has been able to come back, and also doing arts and crafts, preparing the shop window from a remote perspective for those again who can't come back to volunteer, and it's made a huge positive difference to a lot of my counterparts who are, you know, much more vulnerable than I am. From my part, when we started going back to the shop, even before that, the manager of the shop had already explained that there would be changes, and he was very careful in managing our the sensitivity of some of us who were really keen to come back despite their personal challenges, and he found ways to welcome as many as he could, but at the same time staying safe. And that's what we have seen as volunteers, is being back in an environment that has changed extensively. Our interaction with our customers has changed because we can't see as many people as we did, and having the conversations we were having has changed as well, in as much as we're all wearing masks. So that does have that, you know, that distance a little bit, especially in terms of understanding what we're all saying to each other in the shop. And it's still been really fantastic to be back and to still find ways, even if there's fewer of us there, to be part of that shop community, to contribute to the cause that we've decided to support through cancer research. And if anything, the volunteering has been more structured. Anthony was mentioning the rotas, and that's something we have seen as well, the importance of knowing exactly who comes when in case anybody is ill, and this has to be filtered back. But the importance of still being there and still being able to make that contribution, still keeping that community link, has been almost more important than the volunteering aspect, if that makes sense. It's just being a part of life again. And we've continuously been looking at different ways to volunteer. We sort of anticipated we would go back into lockdown too. So people have been finding tasks they can do at home now that they have to go back home. So pricing certain products, doing fashion shows as well. So taking some clothes home that have been kept safe for a number of days, and taking pictures to send back to put on social media. So finding ways to still contribute even though we're back home. And I don't know what else have I not mentioned. I think that the hardest is for the volunteers who have not been able to come back. And the WhatsApp element and the phone calls we're making are obviously very good, but that isolation, that social isolation element is very, very present as volunteers. And I'll finish on a high note, which is we are also seeing so many people wanting to volunteer, and the age range is actually towards the younger part of the population because of furlough and because of people losing their job as well. And again, Anthony has mentioned that as well. The manager is very keen on not missing out on those possibilities. But I don't want to take any more time because I know Helen has a lot to share with you. I'm happy to answer any questions. Otherwise, yeah, thank you everyone.
Thank you very much, Aline. I love all your description of kind of volunteers taking things into their own hands, and you know, their own designing roles and starting up WhatsApp groups. That's great to hear. So aware of time running, so I think I'm going to pass over to Helen just to explain the resource that she's put together, and then we'll just see what the time is after that point. So over to you, Helen.
Thanks, Jane. Are you able to share that?
I will try, and if not, hopefully you'll be able to.
I don't think I can because it's Oh yeah, you've
There we
managed.
go. Yeah.
I think you'll have to scroll down for me as well, Jane, if that's okay.
Okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, really, I don't think there's anything particularly kind of rocket sciencey in here. It's just, I thought it might be helpful to kind of pull out what I've find in terms of the main resources for bringing volunteers back safely, to sort of put it in one place. So this is a sort of a resource sheet of resources, if that makes sense. These are things that have come either through the government website or through ACAS or through the Health and Safety Executive. The top one is the, which I'm sure everybody's seen already, is the latest government guidance on enabling volunteers to return safely. I think this was published on, I think it was the 13th of November, obviously following the information about lockdown 2. And this is information around the different types of people in terms of their vulnerability to coronavirus. So the fact that people who are in the extremely vulnerable category, the advice is only to volunteer from home, whereas for anyone else, the advice is to volunteer from home if you can, and if you can't, and the risk assessment is that the volunteering kind of should take place and is less risky than sort of going out to volunteer, but you can still volunteer you know, in your place of work, but obviously following the risk assessment and the COVID kind of safety instructions in terms of social distancing and hand washing and mask wearing, etc. The next set of resources under sort of risk assessing is, this is stuff that's come out of HSE, but also ACAS. So again, I just thought it might be helpful to have these in one place. So obviously each of these clicks to a link which opens up the relevant website. Yes, we will, someone's just said about sending this out. I think the idea is that we'll send this out with the correspondence following today's webinar, so that you'll all have a copy of this. So the top one is, I'm sure everybody's done their risk assessment now, but the top one is, it's just a template risk assessment with all the sort of key areas that you would need to consider in a generic risk assessment. And I just found that it helped to sort of demystify what needs to go in when you read it. You know, you kind of read, you see that it isn't really rocket science. The next one is the guidance for using things like community centres, training centres, that type of facility, which tend to be you know, centres that voluntary organisations manage. There is another link which actually I will include before we send it out, to the other 14 types of workplaces, and it includes things like offices, sort of cafes, etc. Those ones tend to be more related to kind of commercial or private sector organisations, but actually the themes that are in them, if you are operating a community cafe, or you have volunteers that go into an office, it is kind of relevant and worth looking at. The next one about the conversations and questions. The advice is, once you've done your risk assessment, before you bring staff or volunteers back, that you let them see it and you consult. And this is an ACAS guide for the sorts of questions that you would ask. So it's things like, you know, when you come back into the office or the workplace, which sort of tasks that you do make it difficult to social distance, so that you can kind of take things like that on board. Asking them, you know, where they feel that the touch points are, you know, what type of equipment do you feel lots of people use, again, so you can sort of include that. So there's lots and lots of questions in there, but again, if you're sort of struggling for you know, what sorts of things you need to be asking before you bring people back, then that's worth having a look at. The next one is some training that the British Red Cross have produced, which is really good. It takes about an hour to go through, but if you wanted to ask volunteers to look at this before they returned, then it does cover all the things that you would want to make sure that people understood about transmission of the virus. I think we all know about that now, but it also provides information on the latest government guidance on how to stay safe. And then there's a little quiz at the end that people can complete to sort of make sure that they've understood it all You may or may not want to use it, but if it is worth just having a little look at if you haven't seen it already. And then the final one again comes from ACAS, which is about what to do if somebody comes into the workplace and then sort of they've been identified as having coronavirus, and it talks about cleaning procedures, what types of cleaning materials to use, etc. It's quite detailed. Again, I thought might be useful if you find yourself in that situation. And then the last two, the red resources at the bottom, are just to remind you that Carver has a resource library. The top link will take you to that, and that has all sorts of useful templates in terms of managing volunteers, recruiting volunteers, volunteers and the law, and lots of fact sheets. So if you're not aware of that resource, just have a quick look, because there might be stuff in there that you would find useful. This is why I mentioned in the chat about if people could don't mind sharing the pro formas that they're asking people to sign now when they're coming back to volunteer. We might be able to turn that into some kind of generic template for other groups to use, because we don't have that on the resource library at the moment, but I think it could be really useful at the moment. And then the final link is just the volunteer portal. As I've said, we're still getting quite a lot of people coming forward wanting to volunteer right now because of changes in their circumstances. And this is a really good opportunity for, if you're not already using it, for you to promote your roles, but also you can proactively recruit volunteers through this portal. You can go in and you can actually see volunteers' profiles that have been matched to your roles. So if you're not already using it, please take a look at that. And all the volunteer coordinators would be happy to train you on using the portal if you'd like that. I think that's it, Jane. Let's quick run through that.
Thank you very much, Helen. So just to say to everybody, we will send out a recording of the webinar, that list of resources, a list of attendees, those who do want to share details, a copy of the chat. And just to say that with Richard coming in as volunteering coordinator, we will be getting that volunteer portal for Solihull. We haven't had it previously, but we will now. So that's good news. I just want to say thank you to everybody who's shared their experiences today. It's been absolutely fabulous to hear all the information. So big thank you to everybody. We're on 11:27, so unless there's any burning questions, we'll bring the meeting to an end. So just checking if there's anybody who wants to make kind of a last comment. Okay, we've had 45 people on the webinar at its peak. We've had some people leave. So it's been great to see everybody, and we will continue having these webinars in which we talk about volunteering, so hope to see you all again. And remember, we have volunteering coordinators across Warwickshire and in Solihull, so if you want any advice, support, you want to promote volunteering opportunities, please do so. And good luck everybody with volunteering.